Captain Eliza Tran had never been the first name anyone called. In the buzzing corridors of the 114th Tactical Air Squadron, her name was always the backup, the one who stood behind the star pilots, ready but invisible. To most, she was the shadow behind the spotlight, the girl no one quite noticed. Even her squadron commander treated her like a spare tire, necessary only when something went wrong. Eliza was a quiet force. Her skills were impeccable, top 3. In her graduating class at the Air Force Academy, with flawless flight simulations and a mind that dissected enemy tactics like a chess master studying moves ahead. But she wasn't flashy. She didn't crack jokes in the mess hall or push her way into command meetings. She preferred to let her work speak, even if it often whispered. That morning, the hangar was buzzing with energy. Operation Skydagger was about to launch an unprecedented stealth reconnaissance mission deep into hostile airspace. It was the kind of operation that could tip the scales in a war no one wanted but everyone feared. Captain Jared Mallory was the chosen pilot, the golden boy of the squadron. His reputation for daring maneuvers and charismatic leadership had earned him the mission lead. Eliza was quietly listed as his backup. Mallory's confidence filled the room like electricity. His booming voice carried across the briefing room as he rehearsed the mission plan with the command staff. Eliza sat in the back, studying the enemy's radar patterns on her tablet, tracing the complex dance of detection zones and electronic warfare tactics. She memorized every curve and shadow on the maps, running silent mental drills to anticipate threats before they appeared. Backup's only backup because primary gets hurt, a pilot sneered in passing. Eliza didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. Her Vietnamese-American heritage had taught her resilience since childhood. Her father, Colonel Bao Tran, was a legend in military intelligence, one of those quiet men whose work shaped decades of covert operations but whose name was never spoken aloud. Eliza carried his legacy quietly, like a secret code in her DNA. Hours before takeoff, a ripple of unease passed through the squadron. Mallory reported dizziness and nausea, classic altitude sickness. His doctor ordered him grounded immediately. Panic swept through command like wildfire. Without their ace, the mission was in jeopardy. The generals debated options. Delay meant losing the element of surprise. Cancel meant surrendering ground to the enemy. Then all eyes shifted to Eliza. She stood silently as the squadron leader called her name. It was the first time in months she'd heard it spoken aloud in command. Captain Tran, you're up. The hangar fell quiet, the hum of mechanics and chatter fading into a tense stillness. Eliza nodded and began suiting up, every movement precise, deliberate. Her heart hammered with a mix of nerves and fierce determination. This was no longer about being the backup. This was her moment. Walking to the Raven 9 stealth fighter, she felt the weight of expectation and dismissal pressing on her back. The mechanics exchanged doubtful looks. The crew whispered, the backup pilot, really, she heard none of it. Inside, she replayed every flight simulation, every emergency procedure, every intelligence report. She was ready. Climbing into the cockpit, Eliza took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The canopy sealed around her, cutting off the world. Her fingers danced across controls, running systems checks with a surgeon's precision. Mission Control's voice crackled in her ear, calm, professional, but layered with tension. Raven 9, you're cleared for takeoff. Godspeed, Captain Tran. Engines roared to life beneath her, shaking the jet and her confidence alike. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, Eliza's mind sharpened. She was no longer the quiet backup. She was the pilot now entrusted with lives, secrets, and the fragile thread of peace. As the jet lifted into the pre-dawn sky, the world below faded into shadows. Eliza Tran, the backup pilot, vanished into the clouds, ready to become the ghost her enemies would never forget. The hangar lights dimmed behind Captain Eliza Tran as she taxied the Raven 9 stealth fighter toward the runway. The cold dawn air kissed her helmet's visor, but inside the cockpit, Eliza was burning with focus. Every system was green, every sensor primed. Yet, beneath the calm exterior, 1,000 thoughts raced like missiles in her mind. This was no ordinary flight. This was the mission that could decide the future of the squadron, the war, maybe even her own fate. Behind her, the squadron buzzed with disbelief. Mallory was the star pilot, the fearless leader, the one who'd flown the most combat hours, Now grounded by something as mundane as altitude sickness, he was reduced to watching from the sidelines. No one wanted to admit it, but the mission's success now rested on Eliza's shoulders. The radio crackled to life. Raven 9, you are cleared for takeoff. Proceed with caution, enemy air defenses are active, flight path is briefed. Maintain radio silence unless critical. The voice was steady, but Eliza sensed the undercurrent of anxiety. Every second counted. She pushed the throttle forward, feeling the jet surge as it accelerated. The runway blurred beneath her, the engines roaring like thunder in her ears. The earth fell away as the fighter rose into the cold sky. Eliza's training kicked in, every muscle, every nerve finely tuned to this moment. Flying solo was nothing new. She had logged hundreds of hours alone in simulators and training missions. But this flight was different. Silent skies over hostile territory, where one mistake meant detection, capture, or death. Her fingers danced over the controls, adjusting altitude and speed to slip through enemy radar like a shadow. Ahead, the first wave of enemy detection systems blinked to life. Eliza's cockpit lit up with alerts, a faint ping here, a warning there. Her heart didn't race. She wasn't just flying the plane. She was navigating an invisible minefield of electronic eyes. Years of studying enemy protocols played like a soundtrack in her mind. Then came the jolt. A burst of static from an unknown source. Enemy jamming. Communications began to stutter. Mallory would have pushed hard, charging through with bravado. Eliza did something different. She slowed, dipped lower into the mountainous terrain, and took a hard left, vanishing from the radar's reach like a ghost. Raven 9, what's your status? Mission Control's voice came through, fragile in the static. Maintain flight path, adjusting for interference. Continuing surveillance. No visual contact with hostile fighters yet. Eliza responded evenly, her voice steady despite the tension. She knew the enemy was watching, waiting for her to slip. Her instruments began picking up something new, signals unlike any standard radar pulse. Electronic chatter, calibration frequencies for guided missiles, encrypted commands for ground-to-air batteries. The enemy was gearing up to strike. Eliza's eyes narrowed. This was more than reconnaissance. It was a prelude to war. HQ, I have weapon calibration signals ahead. Confirmed hostile activity. Requesting authorization to continue. Monitoring, she reported. Static. Then a voice, clipped and professional. Raven 9, proceed with caution. Don't engage. Collect data and withdraw immediately. Eliza hesitated. The mission was clear: observe, don't provoke. But her gut told her to stay, to gather every piece of intel before pulling back. I'm holding position for 3 more minutes, she said calmly. Another silence stretched. Then, copy, stay safe. 3 minutes stretched like hours. Eliza's hands remained steady. Her eyes flicked over the screens, absorbing every byte of data. Enemy missile sites, air defense arrays, movement patterns. She wasn't just collecting information, she was mapping their heartbeat. Suddenly, a red alert flared. An enemy fighter scrambled, locking onto her position. The cockpit flashed warnings. Eliza's pulse quickened, but her fingers didn't falter. She pushed the stick hard, sending the jet into a sharp dive through rocky canyons. The enemy's radar sputtered, losing her trail. The fighter barked a hail through scrambled radio frequencies. Eliza's comm switched on automatically. Identify yourself, a rough voice demanded. Without hesitation, Eliza responded, Captain Eliza Tran, Raven 9, U.S. Air Force. A long pause. Then, unexpected silence. The fighter didn't fire. It broke off pursuit and disappeared into the dawn. Eliza exhaled slowly, heart still pounding but mind clear. She had done more than survive. She had dominated the mission without a shot fired. As the Raven 9 climbed out of enemy territory and soared homeward, Eliza's radio buzzed with new orders. Prepare for immediate debrief. You're the only eyes that got the whole picture. The backup pilot was no longer backup. She was the key. The sky above the desert was a dark canvas, speckled with the first hints of dawn. Captain Eliza Tran's Raven 9 stealth fighter cut through the thin air, a whisper of metal and technology moving with deadly grace. The tension in the cockpit was electric but silent. Only the hum of the engines and the faint beeping of her instruments filled the space. Eliza's mission was clear: fly deep into enemy airspace, gather intelligence on their defenses, and return unseen, But what she hadn't expected was the eerie stillness that greeted her arrival. Her radar screens flickered as enemy electronic warfare systems attempted to detect her presence. She felt like a ghost threading her way through a labyrinth of deadly sensors, each one programmed to catch the smallest sign of intrusion. The Raven 9 was designed to slip through this invisible web, but even the most advanced stealth tech required a pilot's instinct, and Eliza had that in spades. As she approached the core of the enemy's territory, her instruments picked up an anomaly: unusual electronic signals, not part of the expected radar patterns. At first, it was just a faint pulse, a whisper in the noise. Then, more pings appeared, like a hidden language being spoken in code. She zoomed in on the source, a network of communications transmitting data about missile calibrations and ground defenses. The enemy was preparing to launch a strike. Eliza's fingers moved over the controls with practiced precision, activating the Raven 9's advanced signal interception modules. She recorded every transmission, every frequency, every shift in the enemy's digital heartbeat. The data would be crucial to the defense strategy back home. Mission Control's voice broke through the static. Raven 9, this is HQ. Do you confirm hostile weapon calibration signals? Yes, HQ, confirmed. Enemy preparing ground-to-air missile arrays. Requesting permission to maintain observation, Eliza replied, her voice calm despite the stakes. Negative. Extract immediately. Risk of detection is too high, came the stern order. Eliza hesitated. The mission's original rules were to gather intel and avoid engagement, but the information she was collecting could prevent a massacre. She weighed the risks for a moment and decided. I'm holding position for 3 more minutes, she announced. There was a long silence. Then, copy that. Be advised, enemy fighters scrambling. Her pulse quickened. The calm before a storm. She knew her chances if caught alone. But the Raven 9 was designed for this dance, a ghost in the sky. Her years of training and countless simulations had prepared her to outthink, outmaneuver, and survive. Suddenly, the enemy fighter appeared on her radar, closing fast. The cockpit lit up with warnings. The Raven 9 shuddered as she took evasive action, banking hard into a valley to hide beneath rugged mountain ridges. Her jet seemed to melt into the shadows. The fighter pilot's voice cracked over the radio, demanding her identity. Eliza's response was steady and clear. Captain Eliza Tran, United States Air Force, Raven 9. There was no response. The enemy fighter pulled back and disappeared. The silence was deafening. Eliza knew then that her name carried weight she hadn't even known she possessed. Intelligence had always whispered stories of a Tran who haunted enemy networks, her father's legacy woven into shadow wars and secret battles. Now, she was walking in those footsteps. With the enemy fighter gone, Eliza resumed data collection, capturing every piece of the puzzle. Her eyes scanned the terrain, her mind calculating escape routes. She began her return journey, flying low and fast to evade any trailing sensors. Her fingers typed commands to encrypt the data stream being sent back to HQ. The information she carried was gold, a potential game changer. She was no longer the backup. She was the spearhead. As dawn broke fully, painting the horizon in hues of orange and purple, Eliza Tran cut across the sky, a ghost returning from the enemy's lair. Her mission was far from over, but the silence she left behind was louder than any gunfire. Back at base, the screens showed her approach. Command waited, breath held, for the pilot they had almost forgotten. The hangar's atmosphere was thick with tension as Captain Eliza Tran's Raven 9 touched down. The ground crew rushed forward, eyes wide with a mix of awe and disbelief. This was the backup pilot, the one no one had expected to lead the mission, returning with a full load of enemy intelligence. The usual cheers and applause were absent, replaced by an electric silence, as everyone struggled to grasp what they had just witnessed. Eliza's boots hit the tarmac with quiet determination. She didn't smile or seek praise. The mission wasn't over yet. The data she carried was raw, dangerous, and priceless. Inside the command center, screens flickered with the intercepted enemy transmissions. Analysts huddled around, cross-referencing every frequency, every coded message Eliza had collected. The realization dawned. The enemy had been preparing a major missile strike, one that could have devastated multiple Allied bases and civilian populations. Her decision to hold position, to risk detection, had provided vital warning that no one else had. But the most puzzling part of the mission lay in the enemy's unexpected reaction during the encounter. When the enemy fighter had locked onto her, demanding identification, Eliza had responded with her full name and rank: Captain Eliza Tran, United States Air Force, Raven 9. For a moment, all comms went silent. The fighter didn't attack. Instead, it disengaged and disappeared. Why? The question gnawed the intelligence officers and mission planners alike. A quick search through classified databases unearthed something startling. The name Tran was flagged in enemy intelligence files associated with a ghost pilot legend, a symbol of fear and unpredictability in their secret files. It was linked to a man who wasn't just a soldier, but a shadow war tactician, Colonel Bao Tran, Eliza's father. Her father had led covert cyber warfare campaigns decades earlier, crippling hostile regimes with invisible strikes and untraceable sabotage. His tactics had become legend, some said myth, in the darker corners of enemy intelligence. Now, it seemed his daughter's name had inherited that silent power. Eliza sat alone in the debriefing room, staring at the map of enemy airspace flickering on the screen. The weight of the mission settled heavily on her shoulders. She hadn't just flown the plane, she'd flown her father's legacy, unknowingly stepping into a role she never sought. Her commanding officer entered the room, eyes softening with respect. "Captain Tran, your mission changed the game. We owe you everything." She nodded but remained silent. The truth was, she hadn't done this for glory or recognition. She'd done it because she was ready when no one else was, because she believed in the mission even when no one else did. Outside the base, word began to spread among the pilots and crew. The backup pilot who became the spearhead. The ghost who silenced enemy fighters with a name. The woman who flew, not for applause but for survival. Back in her quarters, Eliza allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. She called her father, whose voice crackled through the secure line. "You've made me proud," he said simply. "No," she replied quietly, "you made me ready." The enemy's silence wasn't just fear, it was recognition. They knew her, or at least the name she carried. And that knowledge would change everything. As night fell again over the base, Eliza prepared for what was next. She was no longer just the backup pilot. She was the sentinel, a guardian flying in the quiet spaces between war and peace, where silence spoke louder than any gunshot. Captain Eliza Tran sat quietly in the intelligence briefing room, a place usually reserved for the highest-ranking officers and most seasoned strategists. Tonight, however, she was the center of attention, not for her rank, but for the secret that had suddenly unraveled behind her name. The analysts worked frantically, peeling back layers of classified enemy files that suddenly made sense. Buried deep in decades-old encrypted data was the legend of Colonel Bao Tran, Eliza's father. A shadow warrior in the cyber realm, he had orchestrated a series of covert campaigns that had crippled hostile regimes through unseen means: cyber sabotage, misinformation, and electronic warfare that made entire military systems implode. His legacy was one of silent but absolute destruction, a ghost in the machines the enemy never saw coming. And now, decades later, it appeared the enemy had never forgotten the name. Eliza stared at the screen displaying a digital archive of her father's campaigns. Stories of invisible strikes, of entire communication grids that went dark without warning, were etched in the minds of enemy commanders. Her own name, Tran, had been a code word for fear in enemy circles, a ghost pilot, a harbinger of defeat. This revelation rippled through the base like a shockwave. The mission she had flown wasn't just a reconnaissance flight. It was a continuation of a war waged in shadows, a battle fought not with bombs or bullets but with knowledge, precision, and legacy. Back in her quarters, Eliza reflected on what this meant for her. She had always trained hard, pushing herself to the limit, but she hadn't realized she carried the weight of her father's shadow. His quiet strength, his relentless pursuit of unseen victory, it was now part of her story. The connection between her mission and her father's work was undeniable. The enemy's hesitation, the silence after she revealed her name, it was more than respect. It was fear. They knew what Tran represented, a relentless force that could strike without warning and disappear before the enemy even knew they were hit. Despite the weight of this legacy, Eliza refused to be defined by it alone. She was carving her own path, a new chapter in the Tran story. Her calm under pressure, her strategic mind, and her unmatched skill in the cockpit were hers and hers alone. Commanders began to change their approach. Where once she was the backup, Now Eliza was entrusted with leading covert missions into the most dangerous zones. She became the squadron spearhead, the pilot who flew with the confidence of someone who knew she was the enemy's nightmare. Yet, Eliza remained humble. She trained harder than ever, pushing herself beyond the limits of endurance. Every flight was a test not just of skill, but of will. Her father's legacy was a mantle, yes, but it was also a challenge to rise above. She knew the enemy was watching, waiting for any sign of weakness. They were searching for a crack in the armor, a moment of hesitation, but Eliza was determined to be the unbreakable wall between them and the future. Her squadron mates began to see her differently, not just as the quiet backup pilot but as a force to be reckoned with. Whispers of Tran shifted from skepticism to reverence. New pilots sought her advice. Seasoned ones nodded in respect. Yet, for Eliza, the mission was always bigger than herself. It was about protecting lives, about ensuring that no one else would have to face the terror she'd glimpsed in enemy radar signals. One night, as the base lay quiet, Eliza called her father again. His voice was steady, calm, a reminder of the strength that ran through her veins. "You're not just carrying my legacy," he told her. "You're building your own." Eliza smiled softly into the receiver. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." The enemy's silence had echoed for too long. Now, it was her turn to speak with speed, precision, and the quiet power of a name that struck fear before a shot was fired. The days that followed Eliza Tran's mission marked a profound shift, not just in her career, but in the entire atmosphere of the 114th Tactical Air Squadron. The air hung heavy with newfound respect, tinged with the disbelief that someone so quiet, so overlooked, had become the linchpin of a crucial operation. Eliza herself remained a mystery to many. She still ate alone, avoided the spotlight, and kept her thoughts guarded behind her calm demeanor. Yet, beneath the surface, a quiet revolution was unfolding. The squadron was changing, and so was Eliza. Pilots who had once dismissed her as the backup now sought her out. "How did you do it?" they asked, eyes wide with curiosity and newfound admiration. But Eliza didn't hand out easy answers. Instead, she deflected the attention with a simple, "I prepared." Her commanding officer didn't hesitate. Within days, Eliza was reassigned to lead a series of high-stakes missions. No more backups, no more sidelines. She was flying first, leading the squadron's most dangerous sorties into enemy territory. The responsibility weighed on her, but it was a weight she welcomed. In the briefing rooms, Eliza's reputation grew. Commanders studied her flight paths, her decision-making, her ability to remain calm under fire. Intelligence officers praised her for gathering data that had previously been unreachable. The enemy's electronic defenses were no longer impenetrable. Eliza's precision was cracking their code. At the same time, Eliza worked tirelessly behind the scenes. She spent long hours in the simulator, running scenarios, testing new tactics. She pored over intelligence reports, always searching for the next weak point in the enemy's armor. She knew the enemy wouldn't sit idle. They would adapt, evolve, and try to take her down. Her squadron mates watched as the once overlooked pilot transformed into a tactical mastermind. The pilot who was just the backup became the squadron's quiet heart, steady, unyielding, and relentless. One evening, after a grueling mission briefing, Eliza sat alone on the base's rooftop, gazing at the stars. The silence was a stark contrast to the chaos that her missions entailed. Yet, in that stillness, she found clarity. Her mind drifted to her father's lessons, the value of patience, the power of precision, the strength in silence. She understood now that being overlooked was a weapon, if wielded wisely. The enemy's failure to recognize her was their greatest mistake. Suddenly, a message from HQ broke the silence. "Tran, new intel suggests enemy is deploying advanced radar systems. Expect electronic countermeasures. Adapt and overcome." Eliza's fingers moved instinctively across her comms panel. "Understood. I'll be ready." Her squadron watched as she prepared for the next challenge with the quiet confidence of a seasoned warrior. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was a symbol, a testament to resilience, skill, and the power of legacy. That night, as she stood in the briefing room, Eliza felt the weight of expectation, but also the spark of possibility. The enemy had learned to fear the name Tran, but she knew her true battle was just beginning. She was no longer the backup. She was the first line of defense, the ghost in the sky who kept the enemy silent and the nation safe. And she was ready to fly into whatever storm came next. The word spread like wildfire through enemy intelligence channels. Tran is flying. The phrase was whispered in darkened rooms, uttered with dread by radar operators, repeated by commanders who had long feared the name, but never expected to see it again. Captain Eliza Tran's presence in the sky had become a psychological weapon more powerful than any missile or drone strike. Back at the 114th Tactical Air Squadron, Eliza prepared for her next mission, fully aware of the fear she now inspired. Enemy radar had gone dark, and intercepted communications warned of aborted sorties and retreat orders whenever her call sign appeared. The once invisible backup pilot had transformed into the enemy's nightmare. Her jet, the Raven 9, gleamed under the hangar lights as ground crews readied it. Eliza stood nearby, calm and collected, reviewing mission details one last time. The target was a heavily fortified missile installation critical to enemy defense and previously unreachable without massive risk. This time, the mission wasn't just about surveillance. It was about proving that she could strike silently and vanish without a trace. As the engines roared to life, Eliza felt the weight of the moment. This was more than a mission, it was a statement. A message to every enemy commander who had doubted her. She climbed into the cockpit, her mind sharp, her senses attuned. The Raven 9 lifted off smoothly, slicing through the twilight sky with ghostly precision. Enemy radar systems flickered on and off, desperately searching, but failing to lock onto her signature. The air was thick with tension as Eliza navigated through a gauntlet of surface-to-air missiles and electronic jamming. Her route was a calculated masterpiece, weaving through mountain passes and cloud cover, exploiting every gap in the enemy's defenses. Her hands moved instinctively over the controls, adjusting speed and altitude in seamless rhythm. She was not just a pilot. She was an artist painting strokes of survival across the sky. Suddenly, her comms picked up a flurry of frantic enemy chatter. Transmissions warning of Tran flying overhead, orders to abort missions, and confusion echoed through the frequencies. The enemy was unraveling under the weight of her presence. Eliza smiled to herself. This was the power of fear, quiet, invisible, yet unstoppable. As she approached the missile site, Eliza switched the Raven 9 to stealth mode, reducing emissions to nearly zero. Her mission was surgical: gather intelligence, disable key radar components with precision strikes, and vanish before enemy fighters could respond. She released a series of micro-drones armed with electronic disruptors, each one darting silently into the enemy's radar arrays. Explosions were minimal but effective. Systems went dark, communications were jammed, and chaos rippled through the enemy ranks. Without a single missile fired, without a shot exchanged, the mission was a success. Eliza reversed course and headed home, leaving behind a crippled enemy defense and a trail of panic. The enemy's silence was no longer an act of calm, it was a retreat in terror. Back at base, mission control buzzed with excitement and relief. Analysts pored over the data streaming from the micro-drones, confirming the devastating blow Eliza had dealt to enemy defenses. Her mission had shifted the balance of power in the skies. In the days that followed, intercepted enemy transmissions revealed a fractured command struggling to regroup. Abort all flights when Tran is in the air, one message ordered. She's a ghost we cannot catch. Eliza's legend had become a force of nature, but she knew better than to let success breed complacency. Each mission was a step deeper into danger. The enemy was adapting, learning from their failures, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation. For now, though, the skies belonged to her, and the silence she left behind was louder than any roar of war. Years had passed since Captain Eliza Tran's name first echoed through the corridors of the 114th Tactical Air Squadron, and the silence she brought to enemy skies became legend. She had flown countless missions, each one weaving her deeper into the fabric of history, not as a backup pilot, but as a sentinel of the skies. Now, in a packed auditorium at the Air Force Academy, Eliza stood before a new generation of pilots. Her uniform was pristine, her medals modest but earned with sweat and courage. The cadets waited, hungry for wisdom from the woman who had become a symbol of quiet strength and relentless determination. Eliza cleared her throat and began. "They called me the backup pilot," she said, voice steady and clear. Until they stopped calling altogether, the room was silent, hanging on every word. I was invisible to many not because I wasn't capable, but because I was quiet, focused, and patient. I trained when no one was watching, prepared when no one believed I would fly. And when the moment came, I was ready. She paused, eyes scanning the room filled with eager faces. The enemy feared my name, not because of bombs or guns, but because I was relentless. I was precise. I was silent, and I never stopped being ready. Eliza's story was no longer just about her, it was about every pilot who felt overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. It was a call to embrace patience, to hone skills in silence, and to strike when the moment was right. She spoke of legacy, not only the one inherited from her father but the one each pilot must forge on their own. Your name will carry weight, she said. Make sure it's for the right reasons. Be the pilot who changes the game not by shouting, but by being undeniable. After the speech, cadets lined up to shake her hand, to ask questions, to soak in the aura of the woman who had rewritten what it meant to be a pilot. But Eliza remained humble. To her, the real victory was unseen in the silent skies where enemies faltered, in the lives protected by her missions, and in the quiet pride of being ready when no one else was. As she walked offstage, a young cadet called after her, Captain Tran, how do you stay calm under pressure? Eliza smiled. Because I'm not flying for myself. I'm flying for everyone who needs me to be there even if they don't know it yet. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with colors that mirrored the dawn when she first took flight. The enemy's silence had lasted years, but it wasn't just fear. It was respect, and it was a reminder. Sometimes, the quietest voices make the loudest impact. Eliza Tran was never just the backup pilot. She was the ghost in the sky, the one who changed the rules without firing a shot, and her story had only just begun.